am a huge fan of being able to have solid takeaways when I listen to a podcast. And I know with like yours, you talk about how you help someone who wants to be on your podcast get everything in one spot. And that's awesome. It's here's 1, 2, and 3 things that you can do today to be successful and to grow your business.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, podcaster, it's your host, Adam A. Adams, and today we've got Katy Murray on the podcast. We are going to be talking about her show. She's done coming up on 100 episodes, which is awesome. And as well, she serves business owners. So her podcast is called Ginger Biz the Podcast with Katy. The link is already in the show notes, so go ahead and scroll down. She was a photographer on the side. She has a full-time job right now. She was also doing photography, and then she launched a podcast, and now she's got a firm where she supports business owners utilizing her team, which is mostly VAs, as I understand. Is that right, Katy?
Yes, sir.
Cool. So you help people with random things, like a few different things. One of them is Pinterest growth. So if you're listening and you're like, I want to launch a Pinterest, I want to grow a Pinterest, I don't know how to do it, I'm not sure what I'm doing. Katy does that. Her team does that. They also help with blogs, a little bit of website copy, not like building the website literally from scratch, but doing the copy to make sure that your website is reaching out to the right people. And we're going to jump in and find out her history of the last since, let's see, it's probably been over a year, which means, are you publishing more than once a week on average? Because it seems like you are.
Yes, I generally do one solo episode on Tuesdays and then a guest episode on Thursdays.
And have you always done it like that? Because you'd probably be over 100 episodes already.
Correct.
Did you do like one for a while?
Yeah, so the guest ones come and go. Right now, they're pretty fluent. Like we're doing good with that content, but definitely in there, it was kind of figuring out our steps.
Okay. So let me ask you, and I think this would be super beneficial for the listener. You started your podcast over a year ago, and you've learned a couple of things along the way about podcasting. You even mentioned that some of the things are becoming more fluent. So where I want to start is, like, Katy, if you were launching a brand new podcast with just the knowledge in your head that you've learned along the way, what are some things that you would make sure to do or do differently than the first go around? What would you do now if you were launching?
Yeah, great question, Adam. So I would say the first thing is kind of figure out what I wanted to do with guests straight out the gate so that I knew. And then I put a workflow in place, which has been amazing. I have an intake form. It asks every single guest the same questions, and it slates me for rolling into their intros and getting them set up for the recording and getting the media out to them. And I should have been doing that from the get-go. Before, it used to be like, hey, Adam, you want to be on my show? Cool. What do you want to talk about? And then it was just a lot of back and forth. Now I can hop in a group where I can meet somebody and say, hey, here's a link to the landing page. It tells you all about my podcast. And right on that page, you click apply to be a guest and boom, boom, boom. It's so seamless. And it literally takes me like 6 minutes to get a guest outline slated and ready to go with links and everything.
So when they apply with your new intake form, the application to jump on the podcast, it might take them more than 6 minutes to put in all the information, but it takes you 6 minutes or less to know exactly what to do.
Yeah, I would say on average, it takes people like 12 minutes to complete it. Now that's given that they know what they want to talk about. They have to have some sort of expertise because it says, what topic do you want to discuss? And what are 3 to 5 questions that I can help ask to keep the flow of the podcast going? So I have had a couple people stumble on that. They're like, well, I don't know what to talk about. And so that's why I created the landing page to say, here's the people that I serve. Here's what I do. And then they can kind of vet it themselves to see if they're a good fit. It's a little more of a hands-off approach.
Okay, so you got a landing page and it says who you serve, like who is the perfect avatar, who's the listener. And I think that's really smart. Like somebody who's launching a podcast right now, here's an issue that I see all the time. Most of us don't understand who that avatar is ourselves. Even if we do, we're horrible at translating that to the guest who's coming on the show. And what that seems to do is people come on the show and their first thought is, I need to self-promote. I need to make sure everybody knows what my website is. I need to make sure to wiggle in a story about a client. And they are thinking a lot about themselves, and they're not always thinking about who is your perfect listener. And I know that when I go on somebody else's show, I always ask, like, who's the listener? What are they worried about? So I can really understand that. And then cater each of the answers to questions toward how to serve that person. So it's not coming across just as self-promotion. And so one thing that you've done is you've gotten that right up front. So they go to the landing page, they read about this, and then they apply. And it helps them to be more focused on your listener and hopefully less on themselves and what they have to promote. Is that part of it?
Yeah, totally, Adam. And something with that is beneficial, then I'm not rejecting as many people because I'm not like, hey, Adam, unfortunately, like that doesn't fit with what I want to talk about. And I think it enables people who may not be avid listeners or even listened at all to Ginger Biz. They can still step in and be an extension of me and help promote the overall message that I want to share.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the title of the podcast, and let's talk about your perfect listener. So you identify the perfect listener, and I love that you put it on the landing page. Could you take a moment to share with me and our listener who you normally have listening and kind of what they're going through and what you help them with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that my average listener is probably 30 to 35-ish, and they are 0 to 2 years into business or entrepreneurship, whether it's full-time or as a side hustle. And it's someone who has lots of ideas, but only has 2 hands and can't grow past their own knowledge base. So Ginger Biz, the podcast, comes in as kind of a pocket cheerleader, an encourager, and an advocate for here are tips and tricks that have worked for me. Here's what hasn't worked, but here's the solution. And just kind of putting it all together with very, very tangible things. I'm a huge fan of being able to have solid takeaways when I listen to a podcast. And I know with like yours, in one of your previous episodes, you talk about how you help someone who wants to be on your podcast get everything in one spot. And that's awesome because that's the kind of thing I want to hear. That's what Ginger Biz does. It's not these lovey-dovey stories of how we've been successful. It's here's 1, 2, and 3 things that you can do today to be successful and to grow your business.
Yeah. I want to ask a question because as I look at the podcast artwork and the title is simply Ginger Biz when it's just written out. And then you can see that the person in charge, the host is Katy Murray. And then when you look over at the podcast artwork, it's going to be the white background. It'll say in the middle with the logo, Ginger Biz, the podcast with Katy. I'm curious if you've considered making at least a tagline, because like I'm thinking about that perfect listener who's wanting to offload some stuff, wanting to start. They're 35, they're 0 to 2 years in. And I'm curious if what they type in is automatically going to find you. Like if we're typing in Ginger as like the reason what we're trying to listen to. So how have you thought about that? Is it working? Is it not working? Are you adding anything to it? What do you think there?
So it's funny you say that. Just before I jumped on with you, I've been in the process over the last month trying to figure out the perfect tagline because I want to introduce merchandise. And when listeners listen and rate my show, I want to randomly pick people to give merchandise. But as conceited as I may be, they don't want my face and then Ginger Biz with Katy on it. So I am trying to work towards picking a tagline. Most of my listeners, I think right now, come through TDE, targeted daily engagement. So it's not necessarily from a search engine. So that's something that I can definitely grow in. So yes, I've given it a lot of thought, but I'm super indecisive. So trying to figure out the perfect tagline is definitely a little challenging.
Okay. So you mentioned something that I hadn't heard this term, these 3 letters before. I think you said TDE, and was it targeted daily engagement?
Yes, sir.
So how do you do that? Like if we've got a listener who wants to grow their podcast, sounds like this is the way that you get your listeners. Is that part correct? This is how you find them. So how does the listener find listeners? How does the other podcaster find their listeners using TDE?
So Adam, it might be similar with how you and I ran across each other. We're in a group online and I'm interacting and I'm doing targeted daily engagement. So I'm specifically targeting who I want to either be on my show, which in this case, that was it. It was like I was either finding a guest or wanting to be a guest. So that was the target for that day. And I do it daily because I want to continually show up in those groups or those feeds or whatever the case. I know Reddit is a very good spot to do it. So if I'm in there and I'm looking at entrepreneurial like things on Reddit and I'm interacting with those people, I make sure that the host of Ginger Biz is in my bio. It's on my about me. It's all front and center. And then I just offer good insight for these people. And then they get curious, like, dang, this girl knows what she's talking about. And then they stumble on my podcast. Now it goes back to what you said in the beginning. I'm not trying to get on this show or get in any of my TDE areas and just sell. I'm not, hey, come listen to Ginger Biz, jump on, listen. Instead, I want to give them tangible takeaways. So that sparks the curiosity. So it's organic. I'm not just shoving Ginger Biz down anybody's throat. So that's what I consider TDE. And you can do it on other platforms as well. You can do it in Facebook groups. That's probably my biggest one. And that's where I've gotten the last like 40 guests that I've had. Or you can do it on Instagram or Reddit or even LinkedIn has seemed to be a pretty cool spot to start getting to know people. And not to be too long-winded, but an additional point of that is if I know, Adam, that I'm launching Podcast 101, a course that would be perfect for your listeners, I want to go and interact with you and become a voice on your platform and get to know you. And then people will see us interacting online and that'll kind of grow it. So that's another form of TDE.
Cool. So you've had like 40-ish guests that came from that. You've had close-ish to 100 episodes as we're recording now, and probably more when it launches, when this is being published, since you're doing a couple a week. And I'm looking at the ratings and reviews, and I wanted to find out like if you're focused on getting that social proof, the rating and review, or not. And if you are, I'm curious if you talk to guests or clients or friends or family to maybe give you that social proofing on your show.
Absolutely. So after I do a guest episode, I do a couple different things. Bear in mind that my podcast is secondary to business, although we are pivoting that so that it's more monetized and hopefully more the sole income for me. But that being said, I send a thank you, whether it's a gift or a card, to each of my guests personally. And then I do ask them to drop a rating for me. And then in my newsletter, which like my email campaigns, I also request people to leave reviews. So I'm constantly asking people to leave reviews. I've done that with photography. I have over 150 reviews for KMP, and I found that that's been hugely beneficial. So I am working towards that. Yes.
Hey, do you still do the photography at all? Or did that go away?
No, I still do. Definitely pared it back. And maybe this gives some insight, but I'm multi-passionate entrepreneur. So I have a triangle. I'm a human resource profession by day. I have my podcast and branding photography to support other businesses. And then I also do Katy and Co, the virtual assisting. And in the middle of that triangle is just helping other people grow their business. And you can kind of see that similarity. So I still do photography. Yes. Long-winded to answer your question, but really trying to focus more on branding to give other businesses or podcasters marketing material to utilize.
Yeah. I'm about to ask you, just so you can be prepared for it, I'm about to ask you anything else that you would do differently or what you would do if you launched a podcast today. As we get there, I'm thinking through something that you mentioned that I think is really valuable to the listener, that at the end of a guest interview, you will send them a gift or a handwritten card, and you'll ask them for a rating and written review. So you'll take the time to put together something of value. You'll send it to them or hand it to them if you're close, maybe. You'll mail it off to them. And with the reciprocity, because you're giving a gift, you're also asking for something. Will you take a moment to review the podcast? Let us know what you think. And I think that's something that most people listening, or maybe our listener right now, has not heard of this idea. And it could be a great way for them to be able to say, to feel really good about asking for the review. Because it's like, hey, I'm doing something nice for you. it makes it more likely that you'll do it as well, because there is a law of reciprocity. And so I thought that was pretty cool that you give a gift or a handwritten card and you ask for the review. So going back to one of our original questions today, you started to mention some things that you would do differently if you launched a podcast now. Is there anything else that comes to your mind if you were launching today, what you would make sure to do? Earlier, you mentioned you would have known what to do with guests first and foremost. You would have done the workflow and the intake form a lot sooner, like the landing page that you use. Is there anything else that our listener can take away? Because I know you're the type of person who likes to give those takeaways that they could take and utilize so that if they're launching a show now, or if they're new into their podcast, they might be able to do that little tweak.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing, as I'm sure you're very familiar with, is Podfade, and just going into this with really a full idea of what you want to give to your listeners, because I've had a lot of people who've either been on my show and go and launch their own and they've already faded. And I've only been at this for a year. So to me, it's kind of mind boggling that they've already faded. So I would say just go into it with the intention of being ready to learn. Cause like at some point, your brain is going to be used up, right? Like it's not like all 86 episodes is something that I just had in my brain when I sat down one day. So I would say one thing with that is also don't worry about being perfect. I think it's really important to have progress over perfection. So I can tell you when I started my solo episodes, I would re-record them like 3 times just because like maybe I stuttered or maybe this or maybe that. Number 1, post-production, lifesaver. And number 2, it's okay to be real. I think we're more relatable if we just like let that out. Now I can sit down and hammer out 3 to 5 episodes as long as I have an outline with just one straight recording. And so I think really just accepting that and going at it. There's actually a philosophy that if you wait for perfect, like it's not going to happen. But if you launch and you're evolving as you launch, you can really hone in on those things. It's not like I put all my eggs in the basket for my guests when it was this convoluted, crazy onboarding thing. It was just 1 or 2. And then I started realizing there was an easier way. And I wouldn't have known that unless I just started. So that was kind of a lot, but ultimately just dive in head first, be ready to go, enjoy it, and don't fret about being perfect because you're going to continue to learn as you go. And there's resources out there, just like this podcast that you're hosting, that people can come and listen to 10 minutes and have 5 takeaways. It's really beautiful.
Yeah. A long time ago, I was doing more video stuff. And I had this guy who's working at my company with me. His name's Chad. Now he runs all the Facebook ads for all of our clients. So we do editing and post-production and marketing for people that have podcasts. So we try to grow people's shows and we've done a really good job. Now, Chad, he's this big social media guy. And I was kind of the face of the company, even though I was just 25% of my company. Most people knew my company just as me. That was Chad doing that. And he used to get behind a camera and he would give me a script or he would write something for me. And I continued to mess it up. I always would mess it up. You almost get frozen when you're on video and you're looking right at the camera. And I had the toughest time to do anything in one take. And for some reason, I thought that it had to take one take. And so we might have even spent like 2 hours doing the same exact thing and didn't end up with a great product. And then I came to realize something that you just said. Progress over perfection. Don't worry about being perfect. And we are more relatable when we are real. And so I even spelled in my notes, relatable with a capital REAL, just to make it stand out a little bit different. So if we're being our true selves, it's going to fit. And so I started focusing, instead of like, can I just be perfect? Can I make sure to impress people? I changed it to, can I just speak from my heart? Mm-hmm. And then I started doing multiple videos and I would mess up all the time, but I don't think that it went across as he messed up. I think it came across as he's really trying to help me. And so when you're speaking from the heart, it's easier to understand than when you're speaking, trying to be perfect, like you mentioned. And so I think as you mentioned to our listener who might be about to launch a podcast and you're saying, you don't want to pod fade. One of the things you could do is just be yourself. You're going to be more relatable if you are your true self. Progress over perfection. You can continue to grow. I like that because there's too many people who launch a show and they don't think that they're very good. They don't think that it sounds great. And most of us, additionally, hate our own voice. I cannot tell you how long it took me to get over that part. And I'm curious, just randomly curious, Katy, was there ever a time when you were like, ugh, I hate my voice? Did you ever think that, or are you one of the anomalies?
In my podcast, I never thought that. But I will say that growing up, being on the telephone, even to this day, people think I'm a child. Like, they will be like, oh, can I talk to your manager? And I'm like, I'm the head of my department. Thank you. What can I help you with? Like, I have a baby voice, I guess, but not in the podcast. I never really had that. But to your point, people will listen and be like, but you have such a good voice. Like, I couldn't do it because I don't have a good voice. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You have a great voice. And my husband too, my husband has a podcast and I love his voice. Clearly, he's my husband, but like, he's even like, Katy, you carry your voice so well. And I'm like, I love your voice. Like, it sounds really good. So it is funny how we have that perception. I'm
pretty sure my voice sucks. I am pretty sure. I'm pretty confident, but I hear somebody else's voice and I'm like, oh, I love your voice. And they're like, I love yours. And I think they're just saying it because reciprocity. I say, I love your hair. And they're like, oh, your hair's great too. I love your blue eyes. Oh, I like your brown eyes or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Once we get those compliments, but people do say that. And I clearly don't believe it, but it's not the voice. It's the heart. Is that true?
Absolutely. And that's something too. I had someone recently in a group ask about like their photos for their podcast. And I was like, end of the day, I do believe that you need to have a good cover image, like all these things, right? But if the content is there and the passion is there, you're going to go so much farther than someone who hired an amazing graphic designer to create something. And that might go against what you preach, but I believe, yeah, if you have that heart and that passion, it's going to be so much better. Adam, can I add one note about the gifts that I give?
Nope, you're not allowed to. We're over that. Sorry.
Fine.
Go ahead.
So I do want to be clear that I don't give the gifts for these purposes. But one other thing that's nice about the gifts, and I purposely do this, and I learned this with my photography business, is I'll send that note or that gift like a month after, because it's also going to generate generally more media for me. Because like, let's just say I send you a gift, Adam, you might hop on social media and take a pic and then be like, Ginger Biz sent me this, like, how cool. Don't forget to go listen to my latest episode. And so it's kind of a revolving door then. Now, again, I just started out giving gifts and cards because that's my love language, words of affirmation and just acts of service. And that's how I can do it. But it is actually very beneficial too. So when you had said that earlier, I just wanted to loop that in, that it brings people back full circle. They're like, hey, look at this. And then they share all about the podcast again.
I'm glad you shared that, even though I wouldn't let you. Thank you. So real quick, who edits your shows? So when I'm saying your shows, I mean, your husband's got a show and you've got at least the one show, Ginger Biz. And so I'm curious if he edits them all, you edit them all, your virtual assistant that works for your VA team edits them all, or if you hire it off to somebody else.
My husband edits them all.
Okay.
I'm spoiled.
Nice. Does he enjoy it?
Yeah, surprisingly.
So my team, we do some editing and it takes us between 12 and 15 hours to edit one episode. That comes with also the graphics that we need, the emailing the guest, the audio editing, the video editing, writing of the show notes. So the back office stuff is generally between 12 and 15 hours of work. And I'm curious how long it takes you guys. Are you faster than that? Or are you slower than that?
It depends. So if you put our shows side by side, he could edit, let's just say recording time an hour for his show. It can take him like 4 hours to edit just the audio. And I might be a little off on those numbers. But if it's just me in a solo episode, it's like 45 minutes to an hour, partially because I'm just a little, I think, more well-spoken and a little more intentional with my outlines. So I have a lot more work on the front end to set up my recording time well, whereas he has a partner that he does his podcast with. So it takes a little bit longer. And then I think all in, like if it has a guest and we're sending out the media graphics and we're putting in the show notes per episode, probably like 4 to 5 hours for my podcast. And you talked about this earlier. I'm thinking about changing the cover art for each episode, just because I think aesthetically it's going to like instigate more as people are scrolling through the feed. Again, I'm a big Spotify listener, so I see my little Ginger self all through and through and through. So I'm thinking about, I need to do some research and figure out what makes sense. But I know like Armchair Expert, they have a different one based on the days, based on the guests and stuff. So that would probably add some time as well.
Cool. So right now you're not doing that. Is that correct?
Correct. It's just that picture.
And I think only about 20% of those who would be listening right now would understand exactly how to do this. And so speaking to the other 80% listening, what does Katy mean by the cover art for each episode? Because she's got her cover art. She's got her logo, if you want to call it that, for the whole podcast. And then, like, for example, I'm looking at a episode that she published in August, and it's saying the most important thing for building and growing your business. It's episode number 86. So that was published in August on the 24th. And that might have been a solo, that might have been an interview. If, for example, it was an interview and she had a guest, this artwork might still be branded to Ginger Biz the Podcast. It might still be branded to that, but it's most likely going to have the title of that episode on the artwork instead of just the title of the podcast. And most likely it could have the picture of the guest that you had. In fact, when this episode goes live with Adam Adams and Katy Murray, when this episode goes live, it will be branded to our company, our podcast, actually. So it'll be branded to the podcast. And my face is going to be on the image, but it's going to be tiny. And Katy's face is going to be on the image, but it's going to be the highlight. And it will probably create something that has a quote that she said that was awesome, because she's already said a few. Or actually, I should say, and because we do 4 of these every single episode. And actually, I'll be emailing it to you too, Katy. So you'll get a quote card that you might want to share. You'll also get the main artwork that's going to have your face bigger than my face, and it's going to be the title and the episode number, 400 or whatever episode number it ends up being. And there's also going to be a thumbnail image, and there's also going to be an audiogram or a videogram. So it's actually going to be a video, and that is going to be emailed to Katy. She'll be able to share it with whomever she wants. And then additionally, my team will go on to my social media and they'll post it there as well. So it'll be used for all of those reasons. And a resource that the listener, you can utilize, it's not the only resource. There's AI that helps you with this as well. My team creates templates where it's pretty much plug and play. You change the name, you change the episode number, you change some of the copy, change that picture, but everything else is kind of like in a format that you can use. And I think it's called Canva is the resource that I believe we pay for it. I don't know how much it is. I believe we pay it for it, but I'll make sure Canva is in the show notes for you if you're listening. And you can kind of create your own images. And a place that you can go for ideas is growyourshow.com/examples. So I'll make sure growyourshow.com/examples is in the show notes now. This is going to have a whole bunch of that same stuff that Katy's starting to do now and that this episode will have. So go to growyourshow.com/examples, and it'll have these thumbnails. It'll have the quote cards. And it's actually a bunch of our clients' examples. And so it's different color schemes, different fonts, and different attitudes or personalities behind it. So I would check that out if you're thinking about doing this cover art for each episode. Katy, do you have anything to add to that, or should we just jump to the commercial break?
No, I think that's amazing. I'm going to have to check it out because, like I said, I'm in that pivot right now. So I love it.
Perfect. I have a question that I'm excited to ask you, and I know that we're going to find out the best advice that you would have for a podcaster who's been doing this for a little while. We'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We're back with Katy Murray, and we've learned a ton. We've learned how to not pod fade. Why did I say paid fod? Paid fod makes no sense. How to not pod fade, how to do progress over perfection. We talked about who edits her show. We talked about the guests, the workflow, the intake form, the landing page, what TDE is, and how she mentions she does that on different social media platforms. And she mentioned a few of them. And also getting the gifts to the guest who comes on, and what she's doing to get more ratings or views. So we've learned a lot. And I've got two final questions. And the first is, what is your favorite part of podcasting, Katy?
Oh, Adam, great question. My favorite part, which is surprising to me, and I didn't know it till I started, was learning new material to share. Like, I know that I have a lot of thoughts in my brain, but I still research each episode to make sure that the information is up to date. And that just fires me up. I get so much energy from doing the research to work on the podcast, to get those episodes live, and also just the passion and fire between me and the guests. It's so much fun. That is definitely my favorite part. And it's continually challenging me. And I love that.
Nice. Thank you for sharing. And that's a favorite part of what I believe in podcasting as well. You're always learning, you're always growing, you're always connecting with new people, and you can become a much better person by having those conversations and better at your craft. I also wanted to ask you the best advice that you have. You've been doing this over a year. You have like close to 100 episodes. And what would you share to our listener who's fairly new at podcasting to make sure that they are a better podcaster?
I would say keep at it, dive in, both feet, deep end, go for it, because you don't know until you try. Yes, there's what we mentioned, the podcast fade, and that can be a whole thing. But until you try, you don't know. And for someone like me, every time, like, I'm going to get off this call with you, Adam, and I'm just going to be like, okay, I got to do more research. I got to do more, because it fires me up. So just roll with it. Go with that passion, go with that excitement, and let that also carry you through those harder times when you're like, man, I want to be consistent, but I'm going to have to batch create content because like I'm going on vacation in 2 weeks. So let that fuel and that motivation just keep pushing you through.
That's something I have to think about right now. We doubled and then tripled our podcast production. So we went from a couple of episodes to 6 episodes a week. And so it's a lot of that batching. Sometimes we're sponsoring podcast conferences. And so we've got a booth there for days, and I might go on vacation. So batching, making sure your head is very, very smart. And I like just the thought of enjoy it. Have the gratitude for it, enjoy it, do it to the best of your ability. If you're listening, and I know you are, Katy's website is already in the show notes. Also, her podcast, Ginger Biz, is in the show notes as well. So you can scroll down and connect both. Additionally, hopefully you all know that I have a 6-part course. It's the first 6 episodes of this podcast. It's totally free. I don't need your website. I don't need your email. I don't need you to move to another platform. You can check that out. It's how do you have a top podcast. Katy's also got a course for podcasters. If you're new at this and you want to check it out, you can go to the website that we've linked already in the show notes. And Katy, do you mind just real quick telling us a little bit about where you would click on the page, what that looks like, and kind of what we would learn in the course?
Yeah, absolutely. You just hop on my website and you click on podcast. And when you hover it, it'll also have courses. Click on the course and it's Podcast 101. Super simple. And it's literally what my husband and I compiled when we were both building out our podcast, both for ourselves and to share with others, because tech questions can be overwhelming. A lot of people who start a podcast are just super passionate about what they want to talk about, but they don't know all the other elements of it. So it's right there, packaged in a nice little bow, ready to go for you. And you just listen in and do the steps. And there's even a workbook so that you can batch your content and be prepared to not have podcast fade.
Awesome. Yeah. And nobody wants Podfade. Nobody wants Podfade. I want the listener to just know that every other episode is a solo episode. So on the next episode, I've queued up something. I actually took some time to think and consider what are the things people are going through right now? What do people need to know right now? And I actually batched them like Katy's talking about. I batched a few solo episodes. They are ready to go. Check out the next episode. It's going to be a short one. So you probably listen to this one and that one at the same time. I'll see you there. You know, I really don't say this nearly enough. I don't mention this and I feel horrible because it's a great resource for you to be able to take your podcast to the next level. And it's simply a free resource that I don't need your email or anything. It's just a podcasting course that I created that is ended up putting in the very first 6 episodes of this podcast. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely going to want to just check out those first 6 episodes, see how they can help you improve your podcast, get in front of more people, and have a better result where you're making more money through the podcast, etc. So much can happen after you listen through episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if you haven't done it, go do it now. And by the way, if you're subscribed, you'll keep hearing more great content. So to those of you who are, I'll see you on the next episode.